before that monk was disrobed, the Vinaya teacher in that monastery said, just wait a few days. And that Vinaya teacher traced the owner of that robe, the one who brought it to the monastery to offer it to the Sangha. And the Vinaya master found him and said, at the time this monk picked it up for himself, what did you think of that robe? And the owner said, once I dropped it, I knew I would never get it back, so I gave it up. I renounced it. So the Vinaya master concluded, well, when he picked it up, that item had no owner, and so it cannot be called stealing. And so that monk could remain as a monk. In other words, and that monk, the Vinaya master, was praised and praised and praised, because if you do break any monastic rule, the job of the monks who are investigating is always to give the most compassionate interpretation. Being a monk is just such an amazing thing to do. We want to preserve that. Same with being a bhikkhuni. We don't want to throw that away so easily. And from that interpretation and that story, which I refer to again and again and again when I taught the Vinaya, you always must give the most compassionate and lenient interpretation of any rule or any offense which a monk does. And that kindness, as I mentioned to you before, was so important. It's the same when any of you make a mistake and you come up to me and say, Ajahn Brahm, I apologize, I shouldn't have done that. How do I respond? I always respond to you the same way. Oh, never mind, I forgot about that a long time ago. And the forgiveness is so important for me that many of you, if you ask forgiveness on the last day of this retreat, you will hear me say again that I will give you forgiveness in the 3 time zones. I will give you forgiveness for anything you've done in the past. I will give you forgiveness for everything you're doing in this moment. And I will give you forgiveness for everything you ever do in the future. You are all pre-forgiven. And you know that doesn't give you a blank check, as they say. It means it inspires you to be deserving of that pre-forgiveness, that kindness, that compassion, which is one of the most important parts of Buddhism. Okay, but the anicca, when I did start to look at the meaning of anicca, you came across the opposite Pali word called nicca. And nicca was something in the Vinaya to describe like a meal which was given maybe once a week at a monastery. And that was very relevant to me because I've been in Bodhinyana monastery for 48 years. For about 39 years. And at Bodhinyana monastery, there are some people who come every Tuesday. They have to be very sick or got COVID or something for them not to turn up. They're so regular, you can even know what day of the week it is. If they come, it must be Tuesday. And in Buddhism, we call that nicca food, regular food, always comes on the same day. And that really made me understand what anicca is. Something which is regular, can be relied upon, always comes at the same time, or is always there, and suddenly is not there. That's what anicca means. So, some examples of anicca. Your body. I have mentioned this to a few people in the interviews. Your body, you wake up in the morning and you recognize that you're in this same old body that you were in yesterday. If you're a girl today, you'll wake up as a girl tomorrow. If you're Mexican tonight, you'll be Mexican tomorrow. What happened if that wasn't the case? That'd be freaky. And that's what happens in meditation. In meditation, your body totally vanishes. Your five senses disappear, and all you have left is the sixth sense, the mind. And your mind is not French. Your mind is not Malaysian. It's much older than that. And also, it's very, very different. And it's a simile which I wanted to bring up again. I mentioned it in brief, the tadpole and the frog simile. As you will know, a tadpole cannot understand what water is, no more than a fish can understand what water is. Doesn't matter how smart that fish is. Doesn't matter how much Abhidhamma that tadpole studies. The theory is never enough. There's only one way to understand what water is. If you were born in it, lived all your life in it, and know nothing else but water. And that is, little tadpole becomes a frog. And once little tadpole is a frog, no one teaches the tadpole how to jump out of the lake, but the tadpole is messing around, often playing, not really understanding what they're doing, but it does jump. And when it jumps, little frog now, for the first time, finds itself outside of the lake, standing on dry land. Now, can you kind of imagine, fantasize or whatever, imagine what that must be like? You're in a place you've never ever been before. That would be scary for that frog, but it happens so fast that it's just there. You're out of water. You're on dry land. Now, you know the reason why I said scary? Because I've mentioned already that many of you, when you're meditating, you start to get peaceful, you start to get deep, and you get scared. All that's happening, little tadpoles, is you're becoming a frog. And you're about to jump out and see what it's like outside of this human body. And when you do, first of all, I say it's totally different than how you experience things now. And number two, it's entirely pleasant. It's a beautiful thing. If it wasn't pleasant, I know many monks, including one I know very well. That's usually the simile for me. I can't really tell about your entertainments. Who was so close many years ago, so close to one of these deep attainments, the jhanas, but it was scary. So scary, I thought, I can't do this. This is not an accurate description of what goes on, because you can't really think, but I can't do this. It's too scary. But it's so lovely inside. No, you can't. But it's so beautiful. No, but it's so attractive. It is the joy, the pleasure, which often pulls you in. And you never regret it. Having a beautiful time of your life. Sorry, the time of your lives and having a very blissful experience. And you are experiencing what it's like when the five senses and the body in which it plays totally disappear. It's gone. It's anicca. That degree of anicca totally vanished. And you're free of it. Some of the reason why people get scared is the same reason when somebody is being put in jail for, say, 50 years. And then this week, you're going to be released from jail. Many people in prison are terrified of leaving prison. After 50 years, all your friends are in prison. You know how prison works. You've got your own cell. It's reasonably comfortable. At least it feels safe there. And to go outside in this world, how on earth are you going to cope? Sometimes you think. But honestly, if you were in prison for 50 years, isn't it much better to be free? If you have been in this body for so long as a Buddhist, when you're meditating, isn't it so wonderful to be free of this body in a deep meditation? So straight away, that's anicca. It also says a little bit more about dukkha. Because many people feel, as long as they get some decent meditation, and as long as they can look after the health problems in their body, and as long as they can sleep well at night, as long as they don't need to argue with their husband or their wife or their kids, as long as life is pretty easy, that's not so much suffering. But it is. If you knew something better than that, you would realize how this word dukkha applies even to people living in palaces, even to people who are so wealthy, so fit, so successful, so what other people would aspire for. But wise people know that is just more suffering. When you understand what suffering really is, and you know that because weird, surprise, surprise, just even getting into one jhana, and then you look back upon this body, you don't realize in this life how much suffering it is. In this world, where would you like to live? If I did have, somebody mentioned Harry Potter today, or Dumbledore, if I had Harry Potter's wand, and I could say, where would you like to live in the world? And I could tap the wand, and that's where you would live. Would you be happy there? I know that sometimes people are really suffering. They say, well, all I want, is a safe home to live in. Sometimes they say that, but once you give them a safe home to live in, they always want something else. Many people feel that once you've built your dream home, or once you've found your life partner, or once you can retire, you don't have to do anything ever more, then you can be happy ever after. It's called the Cinderella and Prince Charming myth. Have ever you thought that? All you guys who are not married yet. I know 4 guys who are not married. Well, they were, but they're done. Any girls who are still looking for their life partner? I remember this lady telling me, said, he's out there somewhere. I know he's out there somewhere. My soulmate. I said, if you're a Buddhist, don't say that because there's no soul. But I know the one who is meant for me. My happiness is out there. She was about 60 when she told me this. Absolutely crazy. wishful thinking. But instead of that, if you really, I'm not just saying these things to make life disappointing or being dreary, but the amount of freedom you feel when you understand the truth. You understand what suffering is. And anatta, non-self, you think that is really scary. Of all those three, non-self, I mean, there's no one there, the driverless bus. And as some people once told me, we work so hard, to meditate, to keep our precepts, to give generous donations, to become wise. Imagine the monks here. How much have you given up? And how much do you meditate? How much can you not do? But then, if you finally get enlightened and become arahats, then you disappear. You vanish. You're gone, baby, gone. Please excuse me for mentioning that. Gone, baby, gone. I think when I was young, I watched too many movies. What? People say, after all that hard work, I can't enjoy enlightenment? That's why many people, even senior monks, they crave for the ultimate retirement home. Everything else is anatta, but now can I have a piece of one little part of samsara, just one small part, where I can live happily ever after. One little place for my, original mind, or ground of all being, or unconditioned consciousness, or something. Can I enjoy some of the benefits of all the hard work and all the meditation which I have done? And the answer is, nope. This is not a Prince Charming and Cinderella movie. Once Prince Charming and Cinderella meet each other, poof, they're gone. Disappear forever. Gone, baby. That is one of the reasons why it's the wishful thinking. Surely we can find some place where we can exist. No. As the Buddha even said, you may know this simile, is one of his most powerful ones. And sometimes people complain to me, that Ajahn Brahm, you keep talking about truckloads of dung and stepping in the dog poo. You're weird, Ajahn Brahm, you've got an excrement complex. So did the Buddha. He said, if you just got a tiny bit of feces on your finger, it smells. And you have to wash that finger because even a tiny bit smells. A tiny bit of existence. Anyway, that is about the meaning of things like anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So the only way you really know what those mean is when you have experience. That is why, more than anything else, instead of teaching you to take notes and write these things down, we want to teach so you can experience each one of these things. Otherwise, you won't get it. A good explanation of that is one of the stories which I haven't said yet, but it's one of the most fascinating stories of like the personal teaching from Ajahn Chah. When Ajahn Chah got sick towards the end of his life, because we'd read the Vinaya, the original Vinaya in Pali, we found that even in the time of the Buddha, many monasteries had saunas. Saunas were not invented in Norway. They had them in the Ganges Valley, in monasteries. And so we decided, let's build a sauna for Ajahn Chah because he was getting sick. And I must admit, because I was involved in all these discussions, that it really wasn't out of compassion for Ajahn Chah. It was compassion for us. There's a lot of selfishness in that, because if we invited Ajahn Chah over every week, we get a Dhamma talk every week. It's like if you found there was this amazing therapy for Ajahn Brahm's sore throat, but I'd have to come to KL every week. Would you build that? So we did that, and it was highly successful. This sauna which we built, Ajahn Chah would come over once a week. And when he came over in the mid-afternoon, he would give us a Dhamma talk, and after the Dhamma talk, he would go over to his sauna, we'd go and help him. And we'd do this week after week after week. It was a brilliant plan. But then what happens, as I mentioned, sometimes Ajahn Chah gives an incredible talk, sometimes a boring talk, you can never know. But this afternoon, he gave one of his best talks. Absolutely inspiring. And when that happens, you hear an inspiring Dhamma talk, you get so much joy, so much piety. I said I would mention this in a couple of the interviews. Sometimes you get so much joy, you get tears in your eyes. You cry. It's one of the forms of piety. So if anyone cries on this retreat, that's a really good sign. Possibly. It may mean because you're thinking, oh, the retreat is almost over. Ugh. That's attachment. But anyway, a lot of time you get this crying with lots of joy. And that was one of those talks. For me, it was totally inspiring. So after it was finished, there was lots of other monks who were helping Ajahn Chah with his sauna. So I decided just to go around the back of the hall, a nice quiet place, and cross my legs and meditate for a couple of hours. So easy to do when you're inspired. And a wonderful meditation. It's not any effort you have to do. The inspiration just gets all of the hindrances away, and you really enjoy yourself in deep peace and stillness. So when I came out of that meditation, my first thought was to help my teacher, who gave me so much inspiration. You can meditate like this. So I went walking towards the sauna. And as I was walking towards the sauna, I realized I was too late, because I saw Ajahn Chah walking towards me. We were going to cross paths. He was walking to go to his car to be driven back to Wat Pah Pong. So what you usually do is your teacher, you go to the side of the path to let him pass, but he didn't want to pass. He looked at me. And again, this is one of the reasons I'm not going to just underestimate what happened, that Ajahn Chah went right inside my mind to look at it. Ajahn Chah could read minds. But the interesting thing was that for once in my life as his student, I didn't mind at all him going inside my mind to read it. For once my mind was tidy and pure and clean. I was quite proud of it. Come on, have a look. Most times I'd have run the other way. But it was a weird experience. As he was looking at me, you could feel him inside. Or something inside was checking you out. And then when he finished, he looked at me, not threateningly, but seriously, with a lot of firmness. Brahma Wangso, he said. Why? He asked me this question, why? I think many of you have heard this experience before. He had certainly seen that my mind was free of the hindrances, and he wanted to take me to that next level of enlightenment. Why? And then I replied, I don't know. I was a stupid, and I say that, a stupid Cambridge graduate monk. I thought I was smart, but not really. And what did your teacher do when he tried the very best he could to enlighten you, and all you replied was, I don't know? He started laughing. He laughed and laughed and laughed. And that's what he would always do, because we Western monks gave him so much happiness. But it wasn't real happiness, so he stopped. And he looked at me with a firm face again. Brahma Wangso, I will tell you the answer. And of course, I was really excited. Your teacher, the great Ajahn Chah, was going to personally tell you the answer to the question, why? And then as I was listening, he said the answer to the question why is Mai Mi Arai. You will understand that? Thai. Mai Mi Arai means there is nothing. There isn't anything. And then he looked at me, like hopefully, and said, do you understand? And I said, yes. And he said, no, you don't. And he walked away. It was one of those experiences, and that's exactly how it happened. Times like that, you have very clear memories. The answer to the question why is nothing. No self, no ownership, nothing. Do you understand? No, you don't. But one day you do, because that came from a powerful teacher. I had trust he knew what he was saying, but I just was not ready yet to fully understand anatta. And you learned Pali, read all those teachings of the Buddha. That's how the Buddha taught it again and again and again. When you hear it from your teacher as well, so powerful like that, you can't ignore it. You just keep that in mind until you can see it. So the next question, actually this is oh my goodness, it's half an hour. I'm only on question number 2 now. How do we know whether we've attained the first stage of enlightenment? The first stage of enlightenment is very difficult to know. First of all, it is an experience. It's not something you meditate, you keep the precepts, you practice, you learn, and it sort of grows on you. The first stage of enlightenment is an experience, so much so that again, when I was studying the Pali Vinaya, you came across a bunch of questions the Vinaya master is supposed to ask anybody who claims to be a stream winner. Because you have to find out whether they're making this up or whether it's real. And some of those questions are when, where, happens at a time and a place. But even though you may have an experience and you think that you are a stream winner or even an arahat, Sometimes you think you are, you're convinced you are. And then something happens. Your senior monk mixes up the 2 pots of curry, and you get upset and angry and you realize you weren't. That's why it's very easy to know if you're not a stream winner or not enlightened. It's very hard to know that you are. So usually we try and test you out to see if you are not enlightened. And the story behind that, I'm not going to do many questions this evening, sorry. The story behind that is of this Chinese monk who told his senior abbot that he's done his basic training and now he's found this little island in the middle of a lake not far from the main monastery. And he asked permission, can I go to that little island, build a very simple hut and have a little garden there, and so I will look after myself in solitude. All I would ask is once a week for an attendant to come over in a boat with essential supplies. And how could you say no to a request like that? Somebody wants to live in solitude and they really want to put forth diligent effort to become fully enlightened. So the abbot said yes. The monk went off to that island, built himself a very simple kuti, a hut, and an attendant would go over once a week with essential supplies for that monk. After 3 years of solitude, that monk's meditation was so deep, he decided that he'd broken through and was now fully enlightened. So the next time the attendant came, the monk requested a piece of parchment, some ink, and a fine pen. He was going to write some calligraphy. So the attendant left, and 1 week later, he came back with the parchment, the ink, and the pen. The monk had days to write something. So he meditated and meditated, and after a very peaceful, very blissful, deep meditation, he opened the scroll of paper, and in with the pen and the ink, he wrote in exquisite calligraphy, the sort of calligraphy which should be in a museum. And the four-verse poem which he wrote, translated as, "The diligent monk in solitude for 3 years is no longer moved by the 4 worldly winds." And that simile of not being moved by the worldly winds has been used many times even by the Buddha as a symbol for enlightenment. Nothing moves you. So he wrote that, waited for the ink to dry, rolled up the parchment, tied it in a lovely ribbon, and when the attendant came, he said, "Take this to the abbot." And then the monk waited for another week for the reply. And he didn't really meditate that much for the reply. He's already enlightened. He relaxed and started thinking about what the senior monk would do. There was another enlightened monk in the area. They'd probably get him to run one of the monasteries and ask for that piece of parchment that was so exquisitely written that would be sent to some great museum somewhere. Beautiful calligraphy and celebrating the attainment of a new enlightened being. But when the attendant came back There was a scroll of parchment, and the attendant said, "The abbot asked me to give you this." It looked pretty similar to the parchment which he'd sent the previous week. So excitedly, the monk opened the scroll and was horrified over the first line of exquisite calligraphy. The abbot had written in very, very unkempt red biro pen the 4 letters F-A-R-T, fart. On the second line is no longer the diligent monk in solitude for 3 years. There was another 4 letters, this time in capital letters, in red ink. F-A-R-T, farts. The third line is no longer moved. Another 4 letters, F-A-R-T, underlined by the 4 worldly winds. And this was a huge F-A-R-T, underlined 3 times with 3 exclamation marks afterwards. And this was his timeless artistic calligraphy was ruined forever by the stupid abbot. So he was so upset, he got up, he ran to the bank, and he could see the attendant rowing back. He called him over, "Come back now." And when the attendant came back, "Take me to that abbot." And so he ordered the attendant to row him to the abbot. He stormed into the abbot's office, threw down that parchment on the abbot's desk, and said, "What have you done?" And the abbot very calmly stood up, and he opened up the scroll and read out the poem again to this monk. The diligent monk in solitude for 3 years is no longer moved by the 4 worldly winds. Then he looked up to the monk and said, "Yet 4 little farts have blown you clean across the lake." So a fart is a worldly wind. And I kind of like that as my sense of humor. But that was in an old book. Anyway, that's 45 minutes and only 2 questions. Oh dear. Those 2 king and queen of the forest, which you saw flying overhead amongst the birds, and there was a change sort of electricity in the air, were they Garudas? Well, I mean, you've been listening to my talks or reading the books. As I said, I started off as a theoretical physicist, not believing anything, but you did see some weird things in your life as a monk. And one of them in this beautiful temple in the north of Thailand, very close to the Burmese border, with an amazing cave. And so I went there, but during the rains retreat, the cave was too wet to stay in. So I was in my hut one afternoon, alone in this monastery. No other monks were there. The villagers were great. All they wanted to do was to feed you. It was actually that place, I mentioned this to the monks, that I told the villagers that one of my favorite foods was fried battered bananas. Now, I know when I said that last time, I got some here, so please don't bring any tomorrow. Fried battered bananas. I just said that to them. And the next day, that's all I got. A whole alms bowl full of fried battered bananas. No rice, no curry, no potatoes, no bread, just fried battered bananas. And I got sick of them after that. But in that same monastery, one afternoon, you heard there was a strange sound outside. So I went outside to look. And I do really wish I would have had a camera or something to record what was in the air. It's up in the mountains. So, up in the air you can see mountains all around. But every part of the sky was full of birds. A flock of birds, but they covered the whole extent of the sky. There's so many birds up in the air. And amongst those were these two huge birds. And I haven't got a clue what species they were. I remember some of the birds which I have seen in my life. One of the biggest was what's called a king's eagle. That was in Norway, just in the mountains by myself. And I saw this, just came over a ridge of the mountains, saw this bird. It was squatting. And honestly, it was huge, this bird. So huge. Because I was standing, I was told if I'd have knelt, it would have been bigger than me. And I got scared because that bird he was looking at me. Very easy for that bird to actually pick me up or just kill me or something. So just how huge some of these this was actually in Norway, mountain animals. But these birds, I don't know what they were. But all the other birds were up in the sky. And the simile was as if these were such important beings that all the other birds were up there flying with them out of a way of paying respect to them. And I thought that must be what it was, some king and queen of the bird population. And of course afterwards I thought maybe Garudas. Not mean airlines, but real Garudas. It's the only thing you can say about them. Probably were. I say that as a theoretical physicist. Dear Ajahn, nowadays no longer sensual pleasure craves for this and that. After listening to Ajahns Dhamma talk on fake world, each day we are lesser by a day. Time is limited, precious. Better to spend time on spiritual cultivation. Actually, I totally agree with you. Sometimes you have this wonderful opportunity in a couple of more days, here in this temple, in this retreat center. You have the freedom to practice, but don't try and go for broke. Meditate with kindness. Do the very best you can, not expecting anything back in return. That is the 4 ways of letting go. The second part of the Eightfold Path. And those 4 ways of letting go of patinissagga, basically throwing things away, muti, chaga, and analiya, especially chaga. Sometimes people look at chaga as generosity. It means much more than that. It means giving, expecting nothing back in return at all. I know many times people give donations to something like the BGF, and they expect to have their name put on the wall, that this is Dato Victor Wee's meditation hall. You've never done that, well done. The reason why is I don't call that generosity. That's like buying advertising rights. So instead, some of the most amazing donors which I have known never ever say who they are. Big donations which are totally anonymous. I know who they are, but then no one else does. And there's something really beautiful in that. So anyway, that's where the chaga, giving, expecting nothing back in return, a form of letting go. So when we know how to let go, then we notice how to become more peaceful. Life becomes more simple for us. And again, some of the most amazing donors, they come into the meditation hall, they just sit in the back, and no one ever knows just how kind and generous they have been. Dear Ajahn, may I know why I am so scared of frogs, toads, lizards, and cockroaches? I'm not sure, maybe you were one in a previous life? How do you know if you were a frog or a toad, a lizard or a cockroach? A lot of times, these beings are so easy to live with. I remember like lizards. Lizards can't harm you. Like many other animals, lizards, they catch and eat all the animals you don't like. You know, things like, not so much centipedes, but scorpions and stuff. Frogs and toads, they don't do any harm. Frogs are usually fun. Have you ever tried to catch a frog? They jump so much and they're so fast. So frogs, toads, lizards and cockroaches, especially the French, you love frogs. Sorry. Besides, I am also fear of attending funerals and wakes. These images keep appearing in my mind. How do I overcome this? Thank you. We don't have to go to funerals or wakes or anything. But if after good meditation you feel confident enough, it's actually quite inspiring to go to funerals. You know, one of the reasons I really do like going to funeral services, because people start to talk all about the wonderful things that person did in their life. Many human beings do amazing work, sacrifice, generosity, hard work. And if you go to their funeral service, you hear all these amazing tales of what they did. And it inspires me. It inspires me so much. I really complimented the innovation of this American man. He was a good man, and he had some debilitating disease. He knew he was going to die in a couple of weeks. So he decided to have his funeral before he died. Why not? So he could hear all the wonderful things which people said about him. Not only that, he actually held his funeral before he died, listened to all the amazing things which people said about him, and also he mentioned he had the opportunity to see who attended while he still had time to alter his will. Quite a good idea. So why are you afraid of those things? I'm not sure. But sometimes if there was a funeral here and you trusted me, I would walk with you and let you see that there's nothing to be afraid of. And you learn so much and become so peaceful. Death happens. And I don't know why people make it such a big deal. And because it's such a big deal, you have to spend so much money on funerals. Another thing is such a waste. Many years ago, I forget who it was here in Kuala Lumpur, they started up this society for Buddhist funerals. I know the chief priest, Kesri Dhammananda, and we wrote an introduction for it. And always, instead of just spending so much money on food, keep it simple. And instead of donating food to people, sponsor a Dhamma book. And that's a far more efficient way for the use of money. Instead of feeding people, you give them the gift of Dhamma and you share the merits with the one who's died by all the gift of Dhamma you've given. And I thought it was really great. People were being smart enough to challenge all the rituals of death. Do you still do that in Kuala Lumpur? You make houses and burn them at funerals? You know, the paper houses and paper money. Someone showed me some of the paper money you have to burn. Some of it was hell money. I thought it was really cool when I saw the designs on it, but so stupid. So please don't do that. Be wise. And people say it's tradition. It's not tradition. The original Buddhist tradition never had that at all. This is tradition which came much, much, much later. And then you find you're not afraid of frogs, toads, lizards, cockroaches, or anything. I'm not afraid of funerals. You can't avoid it forever, funerals. Each one of you will go to at least one. Your own. Dear Ajahn, in the Tao Te Ching it is said that only through non-doing true mastery can be gained. Oh, that's interesting, that's good. You also say that only when we stop can we reach liberation. Yes. In this regard, can't we say that both teachings are pointing at the same thing? Yes. That's an easy question to answer. I wish all questions were like that, we would be finished. Dear Ajahn, why noble silence is extremely important for meditation practice, especially during retreats. Can you please explain it in details? What are the direct impacts to the practice? When you don't speak to your friends, you find it's much easier not to think when you finish the dinner or the lunch, or the breakfast, and you come and sit in here. When you speak to others, that same thing inside of you which thinks, which literally speaks to yourself when you're meditating, that also gets calmed down. It's much more fun when you're meditating, not speaking at all. I mean, inside. Some people do feel bad because it seems to be rude and impolite to ignore others. Isn't it more rude and impolite to ignore the monk who asked you to be silent? That really is rude. But when go there with others during break time, they will break the ice, showing friendliness by greeting others. If you really want to show friendliness to people, you can do it silently by smiling. It's true that it's important to show friendliness to each other, but you don't need to do that in words. Do that in smiles. Dear Ajahn, I would like to make an aspiration at the end of the retreat. What is the right view regarding making aspirations before the Buddha image? You can do it, but having an aspiration, you also need the means to make that aspiration work. You can aspire for all sorts of things in front of the Buddha image, but you also have to know the causes for those aspirations to come true. Otherwise, you just go in front of the Buddha statue, make an aspiration, may I become enlightened, may I also become filthy rich, may I also become very wealthy. Oh, that's the same thing, isn't it? May I become very rich, enlightened, and perfectly healthy. Can you make an aspiration like that? You can make it, it won't come true. So be careful what aspirations you make. Once you made the aspiration, if it's the wrong aspiration, can you unmake it? Be careful. Ajahn, we are neither the body nor the mind. When I dwell in awareness, dukkha seems to disappear. Would you agree that pure awareness is what remains when the body and the mind are gone? No. If the mind is gone, there can't be any awareness. Awareness is an attribute of the mind. It's not separate from the mind. Would you say this pure awareness is our true nature? No, I would not. That pure awareness, number one, it never is pure. There's always something underneath which you're not seeing. Bends the awareness to fit what you want to see. Is breath meditation still useful even if you never reach jhana? If yes, why? Breath meditation is still useful. It can help in all sorts of things like passing your exams. That's what I did to pass my final exams at Cambridge. It's really useful in order to keep healthy. It's very useful. What else? To impress others? No, that's a joke. But eventually it will lead to jhanas. You can't help it. It's just a natural progress. Is watering a plant, is that really necessary, even if that plant won't grow up to be a mature tree and have flowers or fruits? Of course it is. Next question. Please give guidance on standing meditation. Wait till you can do sitting meditation first. And if you do sitting meditation, get into jhanas, then I'll give you the secret teachings on standing meditation. It is one of the hardest positions, simply because it is quite uncomfortable. Even though sometimes I kind of wondered, those guards at Buckingham Palace, they can stand there for how many hours? It's usually, I think, 45 minutes before they have to change. But it's a very difficult thing to do. Usually you only do that through willpower. So it's not that good. But nevertheless, it can be done. But it is much easier to do sitting meditation and walking meditation. Even laying down meditation can be done. But of course, you have to have overcome sloth and torpor to be able to do that. Ajahn Brahm, how to deal with anger, especially in relation to frustrations and disappointments at work, when the values of the work environment do not align with our personal values. Thank you. One thing you can do is to start your own business. But if you do, can you still keep the values in line with your personal values? You will find in business people always compromise. So it's very difficult to do that. So don't give rise to anger, because that anger is a response which doesn't help anybody. I know that it's been such a long time since I've been angry at anything. When I see other monks getting angry, they may have a good point, but when they're angry about it, I'll give an example. We booked this retreat center and there's no lifts working. That is not right. We should make sure there are lifts and elevators. This is what we signed up for, and you don't give us lifts and elevators. That is just unacceptable. Now, if you said that to the head nun here, what would she hear? She would hear the anger. and she wouldn't take you so seriously. But if you said, please, next time, can you make sure the lifts are working? We've got a very old monk who comes to teach, and I'm sure that many times he almost passed out. Please look after him. And then if you say it like that without any anger, there's a much more chance they will do something. Dear Ajahn, I worked with turbine engines for 25 years. I saw the earth getting warmer and read so much about global warming. Do you think I should resign and go plant a few trees, fruit trees, like Chempedak, which I know nothing, much like turbine engines? What about the wind turbines? They're pretty cool, aren't they? And please do the best you can. But you find you can't be perfect in this world, but you can do something. Dear Ajahn Brahm, last week at Batang Kali, a place near Genting Highlands, there was a major landslide at midnight, sweeping down a few campsites where 30 people got killed overnight, but 60 plus escaped. Why such bad incidents happen? Does this mean these 30 people who got killed, including 12 children, got their karma to ripen? Why did you mention that the 30 people who died got their karma to ripen? Why can't we say that the 60 who escaped got their karma to ripen? Karma is not always bad karma, karma is good karma. Why can't we say the 130 people who came on this retreat got their good karma to ripen? So I don't know why that human beings often they look at karma as some sort of punishment for some bad things we did in the past. We cannot know that. But what we do know is at any time accidents happen. We don't know when the next accident might happen. I do recall that one of these times I came on retreat here in KL and Penang, that when I left KL to go to Penang, that day the tsunami hit Penang. And one of the monks, the second monk at Bodhinyana Monastery, I was so touched. He was ringing up so many people to find out, was Ajahn Brahm okay? Did he survive? When I found out how much time he spent trying to get someone to confirm I was still alive, I said, I never thought you loved me so much. And he replied, it's not because I love and care for you, Ajahn Brahm. It was because I realized if you got killed, I would have to be the abbot. He didn't like that idea. Incidents happen, but good incidents happen as well, to keep them all in context. Can you please guide us on how to use loving-kindness method to achieve nimitta? On the last day of the retreat, I usually do a guided metta meditation, and I will answer that question then. Dear favorite Ajahn, remember as Buddhists, we don't discriminate. We don't have favorites and unfavorites. Look at all these other monks here. Does that mean you don't like them? If meditating too much would disperse the energy of the mind, should we limit the amount of sitting meditation that we do? Who said that meditating too much would disperse the energy of the mind? Instead of that, do meditating much. Take out the two, T-double-O. Can there be too much meditating? Too much talking, yes. So, disperse the energy of the mind? I don't think so. If you meditate properly, it creates energy, focuses it, and has an amazing amount of power. Should we limit the amount of sitting meditation that we do? No. I have noticed that the mind becomes joyful if I meditate a lot. Fine. I notice that too. On the average, are there more monastics who can enter the jhana or fewer compared to those who cannot? Find out. Basically, I don't keep statistics. And I don't really care about statistics. Just want everybody to give it a chance and see how deep you can go in meditation. And sometimes it just happens. I do often mention I can't predict who gets into jhana and who doesn't. So much so, I think I told the story, this guy came, Aussie guy, big guy, wearing, remember, Australian national dress, sing like a t-shirt, shorts, and a couple of flip-flops. That's all. And lots and lots and lots of tattoos. He looked a really rough character. And I thought he got the wrong place. Prison's up the road. And he was the one, he was registered on my retreat. The best meditation, a really wonderful deep jhana. And I always thank him for coming because he showed me that I can't predict. He was the last person I would ever think could get into a jhana, but he did. Dear fellow retreat practitioners, can we try to practice noble silence, including in the dining hall? We have 3 more days to go, 2 more days. So let's make full use of the opportunity to make the space conducive for meditation for everyone as per Ajahn Brahm's instructions. Can you do that? Be honest. By tomorrow morning you'll forget that. Whoever asked that, please don't be critical of others. Even though other people may not be keeping noble silence, please you keep the noble silence. Dear Ajahn, can you please explain the unconditioned? The unconditioned is a translation, not a very accurate translation, of asankata. And it doesn't really mean anything deep, actually it does mean something deep. It means that these are things which haven't been created, they haven't been willed. There's the absence of will. Please share your view about Thai amulets. Are they really so powerful as what the Thais believe? There was one story many years ago which was in even the regional newspaper in Western Australia about a general in the Thai army who was boasting about his amulet which cost $500,000 US. Huge amount of money. And of course, some of those generals were very corrupt. What is a general doing with so much money? But anyway, he bought the amulet because it was guaranteed to protect him from bullets. And as he was boasting about it, he ordered one of his junior officers, a major, to take his revolver, this is the general's revolver, and point it at him and pull the trigger to prove it. Amazing. The major took the revolver, pointed it at the general, pulled the trigger, and shot the general dead. It didn't work. But when somebody asked Ajahn Chah for such an amulet, because he had been drafted into the Thai army, He asked and asked and asked, and eventually Ajahn Chah gave in. I can give you one Buddha to hang around your neck, which I guarantee will protect you from bullets. It's amazing. Ajahn Chah said that. If Ajahn Chah said that, it must be true. It was true. Take the big Buddha statue in the main hall, one about 3 meters high. Hang that around your neck, and no bullet will catch you. Dear Ajahn, if there is no drive for the bus, how come there are karmic results? Because you think there is a driver. You believe there is a driver. Then there is karmic results. If you see through that illusion and know from your own experience there's no driver, then the karmic results, many of them will disappear. Who is the bearer? There is no person who is the bearer. It's just a process. Would it be right that I are so extremely deluded and we are also double charged because our hearts don't have karmic consequences? Can't really understand that last one. Congratulations, you've stumped me. Well done. Okay, so it's now 9:15, so time for the toilet break. And after the toilet break, we'll finish off some of the remaining questions. Questions, it must be my bad karma. Questions never end. They're very good questions, so thank you. Very good. So far, so good. Are people happy that we go on like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the last question then.
Yeah. I was going to keep this to remind you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it getting battery low?
I think battery is going. Just
How's that? Going? Okay, yeah, that's good. Ready? Good, excellent. Okay. Let's start going. Next question, and these are from today. In online Buddhist forums, secular Buddhism is denounced as not Buddhism for rejecting the right view of karma, rebirth, supernatural powers, spontaneously reborn beings. Some secular Buddhists took it too personally and claimed that we gatekeep Buddhism. We try to address the issue of secular Buddhism has wrong view and not to attack the person of secular Buddhists. Are we doing it right? Yes, you are doing it right. That's in the Arana Vibhanga Sutta. The Buddha said, you should never sort of criticize a person, just criticize the view. You don't say secular Buddhists are all stupid. You say that anybody who calls Buddhism the Buddhism does not have rebirth or karma, supernatural powers and stuff like that, say that is basically untenable. If you look at the suttas, they always have those things in Buddhism. If you ask at what you might call the professionals, the monks and the nuns, we've all had experiences somewhere along the line of the results of karma, supernormal stuff. So it is not, I don't know, they call it gatekeeping Buddhism. We have a duty to actually to respect Buddhism by just not demeaning it or not misrepresenting it to other people. So when they call secular Buddhism, Buddhism without these other qualities such as karma, rebirth, or even meditation, or even jhanas, it makes no sense to me. That's what Buddhism is. It's like saying secular football is, we don't have goals. We just kick a ball around. When it goes out anywhere, it just gets thrown in again. It doesn't make any sense. So things like karma and rebirth, especially, those, for what I see, are an essential part of the Buddha's teaching. If you take it out, it's not really Buddhism anymore. Just like meditation. A lot of times that people talk about mindfulness, and I often say that's not mindfulness, that's brainfulness. Talking about the brain and not mentioning more than the brain, the mind, and thinking that mindfulness can be taught and can be successfully developed without such things as right view, without such things as sila, without such things as kindness. To think you can somehow take all these things away from mindfulness training, then you end up where sometimes mindfulness is taught to Marines, US Marines, going into a fight and shooting their guns at people and killing people. There's something very wrong there. But it's a good point you said here, that whoever has an incorrect view, please don't mention that personally to somebody, because that's where they get upset. Just to say that the Buddha obviously taught rebirth and karma and supernatural powers. So if you say he didn't, You are misrepresenting Buddhism. When people ask me whether I am a Buddhist, I sometimes hesitate to answer, often opting to reply, I mostly subscribe to Buddhist philosophy. I say this because more often than not, I am a skeptic. I hesitate to believe in reincarnation and karma and supernatural things. I think that as long as I'm a good person, it should be all right. What do you think? As long as you're a good person, it's very, very good. But some of these things basically are real, they're true. Even like reincarnation or rebirth. When people ask me, they say, Ajahn Brahm, do you believe in rebirth? I say, no. I say, I know rebirth. You don't believe in it. It's true. The same way I notice the laws of gravity. The evidence is compelling. It's good to be a skeptic, but to be informed. And don't just take a skeptical position because you don't know. So things like rebirth, reincarnation, and stuff like that, they're real. And basically, when you look at the laws of proof, philosophically or even scientifically, reincarnation, rebirth has been proved a long time ago. I don't know if there's any physicists here, but we got something a few years ago, the Higgs boson. This was something which they claimed they discovered and proved in the Huge Hadron Collider in CERN, C-E-R-N. That I do know at least one person who worked there and who said that basically they haven't ever seen the Higgs boson, they've just seen its results, and they can't seem to find any other cause that it was a Higgs boson. They call that the God particle in physics. They've only ever seen one of them, and they gave the people who ran that program Nobel Prizes. And I thought, they've only found one? How many times have we found proof of rebirth? Hundreds of times. Proof which cannot be explained in any other way. So I was really concerned why they never gave Professor Stevenson a Nobel Prize for proving rebirth, because you can say he did. This is a very deep question. Dear Ajahn Brahm, Merry Christmas. May you and all beings be well and happy. Sadhu times 3. Is it okay for Buddhists to celebrate Christmas? What is Christmas anyway? It was the Roman tradition would always have a holiday on the 25th of December to celebrate Mithras, Mithras. So sometimes I say to people, Happy Mithras Day. But then Mithras was supposed to be a bull. And Mithras, if you pronounce it in a different way, Mitra. Does that ring any bells for you? Mitra, Kalyana Mitra. Some of those Latin words are so close to Pali and Sanskrit. It's Loving Kindness Day. The bull, that was one of the symbols of the Buddha. On the Asoka column, they have the 4 animals: the bull, the horse, the lion, and what was the last one? Elephant, yeah. So it's one of the symbols of Buddhism. So Mithras Day, maybe it has something to do with Buddhism. So happy Mitra Day today. No, I get really into the connections, historic connections between Buddhism and Christianity, because I was fascinated with this. I always learned at school about this, I don't know what you would call him, philosopher, but he was a very well-educated Greek called Philo of Alexandria, who wrote a book about the life and times of Alexandria around 3 or 4 or 5 AD, 2015 years ago, roughly. And he wrote a very detailed description of the buildings and the people in Alexandria at the time. And in particular, he wrote about a spiritual place which was run by the Therapeutae. And he said it was a big walled enclosure with 2 parts to it. One was for bald-headed spiritual people wearing brown robes who celebrated the moon days, and the other half was for bald-headed women. And when I read translations of this into English, I thought this sounds really like Buddhist bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. And a lot of time people said, oh, you're just wishful thinking. But then there was this one monk, he's since disrobed, who was from Switzerland, and he told me he was fluent in ancient Greek. He learned that at school and I think at university as well. And he was visiting his home. I think his father had a mild heart attack. And so I said, if you have the time, would you mind going into the library and reading about Philo of Alexandria's description of the Therapeutae? Sounds to me like they're Buddhist monks. And he said, yeah, I'll do that. At the time, he didn't seem so convinced. But later, he wrote a letter to me and said, Ajahn Brahm, this is a dead ringer for Buddhist monks and nuns. And I value that comment from him because he was fluent in ancient Greek and also he knew what a monk and nun was. So if there were Buddhist monks and nuns in Alexandria 2,000 years ago, what were they doing there? And did they influence what nowadays we know as Christianity? He also said, Philo, there's thousands more of these Therapeutae further to the south of Egypt. When I first heard that, it made no sense to me at all. There was never any religious people that much down to the south of Alexandria. But what you did find that was one of the major trade routes between India and Europe. They would go to the port of Soparika, just a little to the north of modern-day Mumbai. And there they get into huge boats and go to the port of Aden, whose name at that time was Felix Asiaticus or something. And at that time, the population of what we call Aden now was split almost evenly between Jewish, Egyptians, and Indians. What nowadays we call the expats. And from there, from Aden, they would go in their boats to a port which was built by Philadelphus Ptolemy on the Red Sea. And he built that about 200 BC. And there are still gravestones with Dhammachakas on them, and with Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami on them. And the history of the time said there was many Indians there as well. And from that port on the Red Sea, they go up the Red Sea and then make a quick journey across the desert to the Nile, and then up to Alexandria. That was a trade route at the time. From Alexandria, that was the capital of that part of the Mediterranean Empire. That was where Cleopatra lived, in Alexandria. So there is so much circumstantial evidence that when Philo said there's many more thousands of these therapeutae to the south of Egypt, you understand why. He said this is the way you go to southern Egypt, over to Aden, over to Saparka, Mumbai, to India, and there's thousands more Buddhist monks over there. Next question. Is it safe for people with severe mental illness, e.g. severe depression, PTSD, psychosis, to meditate? Are there any risks? A lot of time I always thought there were risks, but those risks can be looked after. If people are very depressed, then you have to be careful that they're not suicidal. Because sometimes if I tell a ghost story, then that might make people even more depressed. So you've got to be very careful what you say. And many times people with depression, severe depression, do a little bit better by seeing a psychiatrist, psychologist, getting some medication, and then the meditation helps. PTSD, post-traumatic stress, meditation helps enormously. Psychosis. Once there was a young man who wanted to come and meditate who had clinical schizophrenia. And that was one of the things I really thought was dangerous. Because if you're a meditator and you start seeing nimittas, what nimittas will you see? As a schizophrenic, that can really push you over the edge. But this man, he was very impressive. And so I gave him a chance. Now remember, he did stay a while as an anicca. And he came up to me one day and he said, I need to go into the hospital to adjust my medication. He was on clozapine. And he said, because I'm losing it. When he told me that, I was so impressed that he was mindful enough and smart enough to know when it wasn't going correctly. So he went into hospital for a few days, had his medication adjusted and came back again. And for all the time I've known him, I was really impressed with him. And eventually, I gave him novice ordination and then bhikkhu ordination. He's now a Thera, still on clozapine, and you would not know he was a clinical schizophrenic. He's an amazing teacher. I'd love to tell you his name because I'm sure that many of you have met him, but I will not do that without his permission. A clinical schizophrenic who's now a senior monk doing some really great work teaching others. So, is it safe? Depends who they are and what other qualities they have. And as a Buddhist teacher, you always want to give people a chance. That's why I made sure there was the ordination possible for women. Give them a chance and see what happens. And they've done a fantastic job. So then, gay people, give them a chance. See what happens. And some of them, remember the first gay person who I ordained as a monk, and I asked him, look, you're gay. You become a monk. What would you do if this really hot young man came into the monastery and you got excited? That's how I put it. And he said, I'll go into my hut and hide. Fair enough, okay. He now is a very senior monk, and a very good monk as well. No problem at all. You give some people a chance, and they surprise me. They rise to the occasion, become amazing monks. And I'm so happy I've ordained gay monks, and they've done really, really well. So happy that I've ordained schizophrenic monks, and they do marvelously. Depends who they are. You test them out first of all, and if they can stay in a monastery, then I'll ordain them. Oh yeah, here's the next question. After one passed away, will one's mind have enough energy to get reborn to the next life, or will there be a situation that one's mind does not have enough energy to be reborn? He'll need to take time or required to take energy from another to get reborn. You'll all get reborn. If you don't have much energy, then you'll get reborn as a slug who drags its way through life, or like one of those, I think they call them sloths, animals who just don't have much energy. So you will find a birth to suit you. So if you don't want to be reborn as a slug or a sloth, make sure you put some energy into your life now, so you're used to getting up early in the morning and you're used to putting some energy into your life. Otherwise, no guarantee. There was this gentleman, and he said, he was a Buddhist, a good meditator. He said he'd aspired to be a dog in his next life. In Australia, not in Malaysia. I said, why do you want to be reborn as a dog? And he said, Ajahn Brahm, think about it. A dog doesn't have to go to school and do homework. A dog doesn't have to go to work, when you graduate from school. All a dog ever does is sleeps in the house all day. And the dogs in places like Australia, you should see the food they get given. Really, sometimes more delicious food than I got when I was in Northeast Thailand. They get free health care, they get looked after. All they need to do is just to lie there and just let themselves be stroked every now and again. Taken for a walk every morning. They have no stress at all. Would you like to have a life without stress? Food guaranteed, a nice warm home, nobody bugging you at all. But then I told the man who wanted to be reborn as a dog, in Australia, after a few months as a dog, you have to be taken to the vet to get desexed. When I told him that, he said, I never thought of that. I don't want to be a dog. But do dogs have stress? Of course they do. There was this story, a true story apparently. A woman in some suburb in California just came back from the shops with a week's groceries, and she was carrying them from the car, opened the door of her apartment or the house. She opened the door of the house and she had her hands full with the groceries. So she couldn't stop this dog who ran right past her into her house. And she didn't know the dog. But anyway, she put her groceries down and went to look for this dog, and it was like a Labrador dog, beautiful dog. And it was curled up in the corner of one of her rooms, already fast asleep. It looked so cute that she thought, it's just having a sleep. It's not doing any harm. So she left it there. And after putting the groceries away and doing some tidying up or whatever, an hour later, she heard the dog do a very quiet bark, went to see, and the dog was in front of the door. She opened the door, and the dog ran away. She told her husband about that. He said, oh, that's interesting. Who was the dog? She said, don't know, never seen it. So the next day she came home. The dog also, as she opened the door, the dog ran past her again and went into another part of the house, curled up in the corner, and went fast asleep. And she kind of liked the dog coming into her house. It was clean, it had a collar on, and it was so well behaved. She liked dogs, and there was an opportunity to do some good karma, to be kind. This dog was fine, no problem at all. And when the dog wanted to leave, a little bark, and then she opened the door and off it went. Then she talked with her husband. After 3 or 4 times the dog came into her house. What's going on? Where does this dog come from? So the husband had this brilliant idea. The husband, on a piece of paper, wrote a note to the owner of this dog. I don't know where this dog comes from or who owns it, but your dog has been coming into my house every afternoon for the last 4 or 5 days. We don't mind. It's a lovely, well-behaved dog. It just comes in and finds a quiet corner and goes to sleep for an hour or 2. We just wondered, who is it? Who are you? And they wrote that and folded it up and put it in the dog's collar. The next day, when the dog came, it had a different note in the collar, the reply. So they're very excited to read the reply. And then sort of from the owner of this dog, I think they gave the dog's name, this dog lives in a very noisy house. I am the man of the house. My wife is really busy. We've got 6 kids, and they never give this dog any peace at all. 6 young children. The dog comes to your house to get some peace and quiet. Can I come too? Said the man of the house. So that dog knew about stress and knew how to overcome the stress. Go to somebody else's home. Next question. I haven't done this one yet. The questions all over the place. When I meditate, I try to use self-hypnotized technique to relax myself, and it will go deeper into relaxation stage. Is it all right if I put an affirmation message such as self-loving and visualizing light to grow from my heart center? Sure. Is this called meditation or just a relaxation technique? Meditation is a relaxation technique. I can't see anything wrong with that. I find I'll go into stillness after a while, but I'm not sure if this is a proper way to meditate. Yes, it is. Some teachers teach to chant mantra while breathing in and out, and I sometimes try to do that too. Is it okay if using different techniques in meditation? Thank you. Yes, it is. Whatever works, and do that. Dear Ajahn, please advise on opening of the chakra, the on the chakra eye for chakra healing, to attract good energy life, to improve, restore overall well-being. I've never done that and never really understand exactly how it works. Having two eyes is enough for me. But if you've done that before and it works, fine. But be careful, because I've often mentioned the energy of the mind, and that's what sort of drives the energy of these so-called chakras. The energy of the mind is much better if it stays in the mind and doesn't go to the body. But anyway, this is a very serious and not a very nice question, but it's asked, so I'll put it out here. Dear Ajahn, why do some men rape or sexually abuse their daughters? How do we make sense of such acts? Can such acts truly be forgiven? What's the karma of such actions? Honestly, that I find such actions kind of unbelievable as well. In my family, I never saw anything like that. And you see these lovely little kids, and how could anybody harm them, especially if it's family? And I think one of the reasons people do that is because, one, they have opportunity. And when they have opportunity, sometimes the family refuses to criticize, or I won't say punish, but to remove the men away from abusing the women in the family. It's a danger. And of course, people who have been sexually abused like that as young children have enormous negative consequences later on in their life. So those men do some terrible bad karma. And maybe it's because that will destroy the whole family that they're often not reported. But how do we make sense of such acts? I can't understand why a person would do that. Maybe, this is just a maybe, it's because there's so many more beings are being reborn in today's world. Where are those beings coming from? It's very easy to prove there's more people alive today than have probably ever died in the last few hundred years. Where have they come from? And sometimes you can maybe suggest the number of human beings has increased enormously. The number of animals have decreased enormously. Animals which don't have any habitat anymore. So the number of such animals has decreased. And maybe some of those animals have been reborn as human beings. And some of the people who abuse people who expect them to look after them and care for them, protect them, maybe some of those people are rebirth as animals. But anyhow, can they be forgiven? Forgiveness always has to not be the sacrifice of safety, looking after people who are vulnerable. So it may be forgiveness if that's going to help such men, but certainly those men need to be removed from any sort of contact with their daughters, to be like quarantined, not punished, but quarantined, so that whatever sexual inclinations they have can never be visited on the people they're supposed to be looking after. But I must admit, it's so hard. As a monk, people tell you, some of the things which they've seen and what happened to them. And it's hard to understand why people do such things. It's almost impossible to understand, but it happens. So if ever you see anything like that, or anybody trying to do that, please, out of caring for these vulnerable kids, please alert the authorities if it's possible, so that the children can be looked after and protected. Okay. I can't stop on a negative note like that. So, what's a nice way to finish off? Ghost story? I already mentioned to you that I spent a lot of time cultivating connections with people of other religions in Perth, because if we can't show friendship to each other and kindness, it's not a very good reflection on the Buddhist monks. So many years ago, there's only one other monastery in Western Australia, and that's a Benedictine monastery. And so I went out of the way to visit there and to get some connections with the Benedictine monastery. And I remember the abbot there, his name was Abbot Placid, give me a guided tour of his old monastery, which was a couple of 100 years old, one of the first buildings in Western Australia. And as he was showing me around, I couldn't resist asking him, are there any ghosts in these old buildings? Because they were ancient. And he looked at me and said, Ajahn Brahm, you should know, as Catholics, we don't believe in ghosts. And I looked him straight in the eye and said, what about the Holy Ghost then? Oh, Ajahn Brahm, you can't have a proper conversation with Ajahn Brahm. He knew I was leading him on and tricking him. You don't believe in ghosts, but you've got a Holy Ghost. Anyway, that's a little bit of fun, maybe, I'm not quite sure. I was just trying to think of any other funny stories which I might have before we go to bed. But I think I'm too tired. So, thank you all for listening. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Excellent. Okay. So, actually, I did very well. I've only got a few questions left from today. So tomorrow, we should be able to finish them off. However, if we don't finish them off, we can always take that option, having another week. No, we won't do that. So good night, everybody, and sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Excellent. What a question. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, hey. Oops.